It's 10:01. I think we should get started. Good morning. I'm Josh Hers, the president of Associated Agencies. As most of you know, we are a 130-year-old privately held insurance brokerage and risk advisory firm. Given the rapidly changing, thankfully for the better, COVID-19 environment, we thought it would be of value to come together to discuss some of the risks associated with bringing our teams back to the office, visiting customers and clients, travel, and what we can do to mitigate some of the legal risks. We'd like to welcome our partners from Much Ellis to speak with us today about some of the risks and what we can do. Joining us today, we have Cheryl Halpern, who is the chair of Much Law's Labor and Employment Group. Cheryl helps employers make important decisions about their employees in a way that is designed to minimize risk. Also joining us is Laura El-Kayam from Much Law. Laura helps employers implement best practices to promote compliance with federal, state, and local labor and employment laws while remaining mindful of each company's unique business strategies and objectives. We appreciate you taking the time to hear from the Much team today. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat, and Laura or Cheryl will do their best to address. Cheryl, take it away.
Thanks, Josh. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Vaccinations and the Workplace. As Josh said, I chair the Labor and Employment Group at Much Ellis, which is a full-service firm here in Chicago. We also have an office in sunny Orange County, California. Laura is one of the talented members of my team. She is not only a brilliant attorney, but she's also the creative backbone of our group. So she deserves 100% of the credit for our beautiful slides today. As the title of our presentation suggests, we're going to share with you some key considerations regarding how COVID-19 vaccinations may impact your workplace policies and practices. We're going to run through our material, and we're hoping that we may answer many of the questions that are in your heads today. So maybe listen to our talk, and then if you still have questions that we haven't answered, you can post them in the chat, and we will make sure that we have time at the end for any additional questions that you might have. We planned this webinar, and then there was a big wrench thrown in it by the CDC, which is really the issue that's been on everyone's minds since 1 week ago today. Last Thursday, the CDC announced that fully vaccinated people can resume activities without wearing a mask or physically distancing. And with that statement, it was suddenly like bra burning in the 60s. Fully vaccinated people whipped off their masks and declared freedom. But those people apparently didn't read past the CDC's first 13 words, because that announcement was made with a big fat caveat. Yes, fully vaccinated people can resume activities without wearing a mask or physically distancing, except where required by federal, state, local, tribal, or territorial laws, rules, and regulations, including local business and workplace guidance. So what does that mean? It means if there is an applicable law that says even fully vaccinated people need to wear masks and still need to socially distance, then fully vaccinated people still need to wear masks and still need to socially distance. And perhaps even more importantly for Laura and me, as well as those of you from associated agencies, since each of us advises businesses about risk management all day long, organizations can continue to require fully vaccinated individuals to wear masks and continue to socially distance if that's what they feel is best for their employees and their customers. I took the Metro in this morning for the first time since March of 2020, and I will tell you that the announcer said specifically, some of you know that the CDC made an announcement last week that allows fully vaccinated people not to wear masks. However, we here at Metro continue to require masks for each and every passenger on the train. That's an example of that caveat that the CDC specifically included when they published their announcement last Thursday. And that announcement created a domino effect at the federal, the state, and the local level. Suddenly everyone was tuning in to find out, what is everyone else going to say because the CDC, posted this new guidance. On Friday, OSHA announced that it was deferring to the CDC, at least for now. There's a big post at the top of their page, their homepage on their website. And so for right now, they're going to defer to the CDC. On Monday, Governor Pritzker signed an executive order that essentially rescinded previous mask and social distancing mandates and brought Illinois into alignment with the CDC's new guidance. But just like the CDC, he also emphasized during his press conference and in his press release that businesses can still make their own rules. Now, Mayor Lightfoot here in Chicago is not being quite as deferential to the CDC at the moment as Governor Pritzker is. And on Monday, she said that the CDC's guidance is confusing. And until the CDC provides more information, she's going to continue to wear a mask, and she's going to encourage even fully vaccinated Chicagoans to continue wearing masks. Also on Tuesday, the Chicago Department of Public Health published a statement making it official that the city is no longer requiring masks for fully vaccinated people in most settings. Again, there's that caveat built in, but mask wearing continues to be encouraged in most settings until the city more fully reopens. Now, as a side note, I want to mention that Chicago businesses now have the option of taking advantage of a new quote unquote vaccine exemption. This applies primarily to businesses that are customer facing. So restaurants, bars, theaters, performance venues, museums. Essentially, this vaccine exemption says that fully vaccinated individuals don't need to be counted toward COVID-19 capacity limits. So if you're counting how many people are in your bar at a given time, whatever the current capacity limit is, fully vaccinated people don't count. And businesses that want to take advantage of the vaccine exemption are supposed to ask patrons for proof of their fully vaccinated status, meaning show your vaccine card or show a photo on your phone of your vaccine card. I have to say, I did a search online and I'm a little concerned because it seems like vaccine cards are readily available. The state of Tennessee even has a blank vaccine card published on their website so that you can print it and maybe fill it out yourself instead of going to Walgreens or CVS and having them fill it out. I think that there's going to be a lot of vaccination card fraud going on in the coming days, weeks, and months. But I digress. What I described in terms of Governor Pritzker and Mayor Lightfoot, that's all local. If we look across the nation, some states have now lifted their mask mandates. Other states are taking a more cautious approach. Of course, in the 30-minute time slot that we have available this morning, we cannot tour you through the tangled web of state and local laws across the nation. Suffice it to say, we will be keeping an eye on it. So that's the 30,000-pound gorilla in the room that has existed since last Thursday. Now we're going to move on to some of the other issues that we're helping our clients navigate regarding COVID vaccines. Laura?
Yeah, so the big question right now that many of our clients are asking is, what do we do about vaccines? Can we require them? And the short answer, like any answer a lawyer will give you, is that you can probably mandate them, but there are some caveats. So when vaccinations first became widely available, the EEOC issued guidance indicating that it was okay for employers to require vaccination. Of course, they also recognized medical and religious exemptions, that some employees may not be able to get a vaccine because of medical reasons, pregnancy, or sincerely held religious beliefs. So if you have a policy requiring vaccines, these employees will inevitably be making what are essentially requests for an accommodation. I'm requesting that I not be subject to this vaccine mandate for a medical or religious reason. And in these cases, you go through the same process that you would in handling any other employee request for an accommodation. You should go through the interactive process. You should assess whether an unvaccinated individual would pose a direct threat to themselves or to others in the workplace, and really engage in sort of an individualized assessment that's tailored to the specific employee's situation. I'll note that if an employee declines to get vaccinated due to a sincerely held religious belief, you should generally go ahead and assume that they're being sincere and only request proof in situations where you suspect that their request may not be legitimate. So at a baseline level, there's what to be mindful of in mandating vaccines in terms of these major exemptions. But beyond that, as we've seen employers implementing mandatory vaccine policies over the last few months, we saw a few things pop up across the country, and those have been in connection with the Emergency Use Authorization Statute. This is the authority under which the FDA has approved the vaccines on an emergency basis. And that law has some language to suggest that an individual can't be required to take a vaccine or any other medication that's approved on an emergency basis. So we've actually seen a couple of lawsuits filed or threatened on this basis. You, employer, can't require me to take a vaccine that's only approved for emergency use. And so these cases are going to weave their way through the courts, and they're new cases that no one's ever seen before. And that's why our answer to this question is probably yes, you can mandate it, but there is some risk that an employee may claim it's unlawful. Of course, there's always legal things and then practical things to think about. So Cheryl's going to touch on some of those practical things.
So as Laura just mentioned, the topic of vaccination raises not only legal issues, which is why there's two lawyers giving this presentation today, but also practical issues that I think all of us as business advisors and business owners need to keep in mind when deciding what we want our vaccination policies and practices to look like. So what we're going to do now is kind of run through some of the additional questions that we've been fielding that some of you at associated agencies also might be fielding as well. So one question we're asked almost daily is whether employers can require their employees to provide proof of vaccination. In other words, can we find out who in our workforce is vaccinated? And, typical lawyer answer again, generally yes, but keep in mind that asking the question may elicit information about an employee's medical condition. So if you ask your employee, so have you been vaccinated? You might not just get a yes or no answer. You might get something like, no, and I'm not getting the vaccine because I have HIV and I am severely immunocompromised. And once you know that, you can't unknow it. So any decisions that you make regarding that employee going forward are going to be against the backdrop of your knowledge of that employee's medical condition. And so the employee could conceivably say that some adverse action that you took against them, which you believe is performance-based or disciplinary for legitimate reasons, was actually because they had disclosed to you that they have a medical condition. We're really seeing two scenarios where employers want to know the vaccine status of their employees. The first is to get overall data regarding employee attitudes about vaccines and the percentage of the workforce that has been vaccinated, particularly for employers that have had their businesses relatively closed for the last year and are considering reopening at some point this summer. And that information is typically elicited by sending out surveys for employees to answer. The second scenario is when an employer is dealing with a specific employee and needs to know what that specific employee's vaccination status is. For example, if the employee's job requires them to go on site to customer location and that customer location requires proof of vaccination. And we're going to talk about that in a little more detail in a few minutes. So if you decide to send out a survey regarding employees' vaccination status, we recommend that you limit the questions to those that require simply a yes or no answer, and allow employees to answer anonymously, and make sure your survey specifically says at the beginning, we're not tracking who you are when you answer the survey, it is strictly anonymous. So the questions that you could pose would be, are you fully vaccinated? Yes or no? If not, have you received your first shot? Yes or no? If not, do you intend to get vaccinated? Again, yes or no? If an employee indicates they're not vaccinated and don't intend to be, and you follow up with that seemingly innocent question, well, why not? Again, that question may needlessly open the door for the employee to disclose some type of a medical condition or pregnancy or a sincerely held religious belief. And you're really not looking for that information to begin with when you send out a survey. As I suggested, the time when you want to find out the reason an employee doesn't intend to get vaccinated is if their status impacts your operations. So for example, if your business rents space in a building that is now going to require everyone who comes on site to show proof of vaccination, you'll have a decision to make regarding an unvaccinated employee whose job duties require them to come on site. And if the reason that the employee is not vaccinated is due to a medical condition, pregnancy, or a sincerely held religious belief, as Laura explained a few minutes ago, you're supposed to go through the interactive process, which is longhand for having a conversation with the employee. The Illinois Department of Human Rights and the EEOC call it an interactive process, which is really fancy, but it's really just a conversation, getting information from the employee so that you can assess whether you can provide a reasonable accommodation that won't pose an undue hardship to your business. But if the reason that the employee gives for not getting vaccinated has nothing to do with a protected characteristic, for example, the employee's philosophy is there's no reason to get the COVID vaccine because they've never had a flu shot, but they've never gotten the flu, you're not legally required to offer an accommodation in that instance. And by the way, just so you know, I don't make this stuff up. There's this entirely too friendly guy that works in the produce department at my grocery store, and he tells me that that's the reason that he's not getting vaccinated. Of course, he also asked me for legal advice when he was considering marrying a girl so she could stay in the country. So, you know, I'm not going to try to really get that too deep into his head. The long story short is that the reason the employee is not vaccinated may be relevant for business reasons. But if the approach that you decide to take in your business is to give flexibility and grant accommodations to every unvaccinated employee, regardless of the reason that they're not vaccinated, then for you, there would really be no business-related reason to ask why they've decided not to get the vaccine. So you really need to think carefully about what your practices are going to be when deciding what questions that you want to ask of your employees. Another question we're being asked is how the vaccine impacts existing COVID-19 prevention plans. So last spring, early summer, and continuing on, you know, businesses were scrambling to come up with written COVID-19 prevention plans. And now that, especially since the CDC's guidance came out last week, the question becomes, you know, should employees continue to be required to wear masks and socially distance? Throughout the pandemic, we have suggested to our clients that they can use the CDC's guidance as a security blanket. And the CDC's most recent guidance really doesn't change that, because as I mentioned, not only do, you know, they do say that fully vaccinated individuals don't need to wear masks, but with that major big caveat that vaccinated individuals still need to comply with the rules in their workplace and at local businesses. And they expand on that. If you scroll down that webpage, they really get into that a little bit more. If you do decide to continue to require mask wearing and social distancing in your business, even for fully vaccinated employees and customers, you may be asked questions by the fully vaccinated. But why do I still need to wear a mask? The easy answer is the one that my parents gave me when I was a kid whenever I questioned their decisions, because I said so. But just in case you're concerned that that won't fly, right now you can easily say something simple like, look, we're still evaluating whether we're going to change our existing policies. This new guidance is really new, and we'll let you know, but for now we're staying the course. There's no reason why you need to make a decision today. And as you do evaluate whether to change your policies, keep in mind that putting aside what the scientists and safety experts say and putting aside legalities, treating vaccinated employees differently than non-vaccinated employees would essentially create two classes of citizenship in the workplace. And that may impact morale and the culture of your organization as a whole. But there is also a legal reason to really think hard about this, and that is, if the reason that some of your employees haven't been vaccinated is because of, and I know we sound like a broken record, an underlying medical condition or pregnancy or a sincerely held religious belief, Laura and I have a sneaking suspicion that that may be used by enterprising plaintiffs' attorneys to suggest that the inconsistency in the way you're treating your employees and implementing workplace safety rules favors vaccinated individuals and therefore has the effect of adversely impacting employees with those types of protected characteristics. So again, this is all very new, and we don't know what it's going to look like, but plaintiffs' lawyers tend to get creative when there's money on the line. So long story short, it may be best to apply health and safety rules equally to everyone, unvaccinated and fully vaccinated alike, at least for now, until we see how all of this is going to unfold. We're also being asked how to handle situations where customers require visitors to their workplace to be vaccinated and to provide proof of vaccination. So naturally, for vaccinated employees, that's not an issue. But for employees who have chosen not to get the vaccine, there's a legal answer that I alluded to a few minutes ago, and there's also a practical answer. And this is going to sound very similar to what Laura and I have been describing. The legal answer is that even if a customer has a more stringent rule than you do, if the reason the employee who is supposed to go to that customer location is not vaccinated is due to a medical condition, a pregnancy, or a sincerely held religious belief, you're supposed to go through the same interactive process and assess whether you can provide a reasonable accommodation that won't pose an undue hardship to your business. So for example, if that employee has been meeting with that customer by Zoom for the last 14 months, is that something that they could continue to do? Naturally, if the customer wants them to be there in person, then maybe you switch the route for that employee with another employee who has already been vaccinated. But again, if the reason has nothing to do with any of those protected characteristics, for example, and I have heard this one too, the employee believes the vaccinations are really the government's effort to implant each of us with monitoring microchips, you're not legally required to offer an accommodation. Of course, the government's been doing that with our cell phones for years, so I don't know how this is going to change anything. The practical answer also, though, is that even if you're not legally required to accommodate, a conspiracy theorist or someone who's just a complete anti-vaxxer for whatever reason that they are, if they've been a valuable member of your workforce up until now, you may want to consider making the business decision to accommodate them anyway. If they're a huge producer, your customers adore them, they're bringing in, oodles of money for your organization, think about whether, you really want to take an inflexible approach. Employers are also asking us how to handle employee travel for unvaccinated employees. So we've been keeping an eye on this. I did a search last night again, and I'm not seeing any airlines requiring proof of vaccination for domestic travel. International is a whole different story, but at least for domestic travel, I haven't seen an airline announce that they're going to require proof of vaccination. Personally, I think that may be cutting off their own noses to spite their faces because they've lost so much money in the last 14 months, and that would probably cause them to lose additional money because the patron could easily go to another airline. But that's just my impression. If that begins and airlines start requiring proof of vaccination for travel, then the approach for employers should be exactly the same as what we've been talking about when a customer requires visitors to the workplace to be vaccinated, and you've got an employee who isn't, or you have an employee, again, who's going to travel and the airline's requiring proof of vaccination and they're not vaccinated. Again, you go through that same interactive process and you assess whether there's a reasonable accommodation you could make that won't pose an undue hardship for your business. But there's some additional day-to-day issues that come up regarding vaccines that Laura's going to address right now.
Yeah, so another thing you want to keep front of mind is deciding how you want to handle employees who take time off for COVID testing, vaccinations, or if they're recovering from the side effects of the vaccine, and making sure that you publish policies that are clear and address those situations. Just like with everything else we've talked about today, there's legal and practical considerations to keep in mind when developing your policies. So from a legal standpoint, just like the pandemic itself, the rules across the country are constantly evolving, and you need to consider federal, state, and local laws when deciding what the best course of action is. I'll take you down a quick trip down memory lane to last March with the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the FFCRA, which I'm sure many of you became intimately familiar with. And the FFCRA required employers to provide paid leave in a variety of COVID-related circumstances, including if the employee was experiencing symptoms, getting tested, or waiting for results. Of course, the act provided tax credits that reimbursed employers 100% of the wages paid for that leave. So that law expired at the end of 2020, and now compliance with the law is voluntary. And under the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, if an employer continues to provide paid sick leave, tax credits are still available, including for paid leave given to an employee to get a vaccine or to recover from the vaccine. So if your current policy is to continue complying voluntarily with the FFCRA, leave for vaccine-related things like the appointment and recovering from side effects will fall within the scope of that policy. But whether or not you're still providing FFCRA leave voluntarily, you'll need to consider whether there are state or local laws in play, and they seem to be popping up quickly all over the country. So for example, the city of Chicago recently rolled out a new ordinance requiring employers who mandate the vaccine to provide their Chicago employees with up to 4 hours of paid time off per dose if they get vaccinated during regular business hours. For employers who require their Chicago employees to get vaccinated, they have to provide those employees with paid leave of up to 4 hours per dose if the vaccination takes place during an employee's regular working hours. And the employees can't be required to take their own time to get vaccinated outside of working hours or to use their PTO or vacation time towards those hours. For Chicago employers who aren't mandating the vaccine, the ordinance doesn't create a separate bucket of paid leave that you need to provide, but employees must be permitted to use their available paid sick leave or PTO to take time off to get the vaccine. and those employees can't be required to get vaccinated outside of working hours. The Chicago ordinance doesn't hold a candle to the New York law. That was enacted just a few weeks back and is a bit more stringent. That requires all employers, whether they mandate the vaccine or not, to provide employees with 4 hours of paid leave to get vaccinated, 4 hours of paid leave per shot. Our friends in California, not surprisingly, have passed a similar law. They created a new bucket of supplemental paid sick leave employers must provide for a variety of COVID-related reasons, including to get vaccinated and to recover from side effects. And typical of California, they actually made that law effective retroactively to January 1st. So how much paid leave employees are entitled to depends on how much they work. For full-time employees, it can be up to 80 hours of paid leave. And again, they expect California employers to look backwards to January 1st. So that just sends a chill through my spine thinking about handling that. So those are just a few examples. That's a very high level overview. We know that your businesses are across the country, and so it's really important to be mindful of what your state and local rules require in terms of paying employees for this time. And we don't want to get too deep in the weeds. We have a limited time today. I think we have technically 3 minutes left on our half-hour slot. And frankly, we haven't memorized all the particulars. There's dozens of laws across the country, and just like you, we're learning as we go. And you know, we're here to provide specifics on any of these laws and to help as you navigate these questions. So putting aside the legalities for a second, even though the vaccine is more readily available now, there's still people who are struggling to get vaccine appointments. And even if employees can get vaccinated outside of work hours, the side effects are intense. So I was one of the lucky ones. I was just, you know, I rolled right out of bed after my vaccine. Cheryl, not so much. And as some of you know, this can knock you out for 1 to 2 days. But that's much better than the amount of time lost for dealing with COVID symptoms. So from a practical standpoint, you may want to consider the relative costs and benefits of giving employees paid time off to get vaccinated and to recover. You know, we don't have a playbook for what we've been dealing with since March of 2020. I didn't study pandemic law in law school. I assume your employee handbooks don't have a chapter that starts if there's a pandemic. So we're all doing our best to be human beings to one another. And the word that we've really used a lot in the last 14 months with our clients is the word flexibility. We've suggested that clients keep flexible, keep in mind what employees have been going through during this time, and to develop policies with the legal and the practical and the flexible in mind. So with that, Cheryl, I think we open up now to questions.
Let's see if we have any. All right, so we have a question. Isn't it discriminatory to require unvaccinated employees to wear masks while those that have not been vaccinated have to wear masks? Not sure how requiring an ID to vote can be called discriminatory, but this is not. Well, I think that the difference here, now let me say, I think it's quite possible that there are going to be employees who hire plaintiffs' employment lawyers that decide to file claims on that basis, which is one of the risks that we mentioned when creating 2 classes of citizenship in the workplace. But it is a little bit different here because there are health and safety concerns involved. So it's not just, hey, our company wants to make more money. It's, look, there are legitimate health and safety concerns going on here, and that's why we're continuing to mandate masks, or we're requiring vaccines for employees to come into the workplace. So I think that would be a defense to a claim like that. But you're right, there can be discrimination claims filed, and it's entirely possible that there will be. Laura, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I'll just say that at a baseline level, your vaccination status isn't in itself a protected characteristic. It only sort of like oozes into the world of protected characteristics when the reason you're not vaccinated has to do with a medical issue, pregnancy, or a sincerely held religious belief. So I'll also say, you know, Cheryl and I were complaining about this about an hour ago, that the guidelines that have come out since the CDC's announcement have not really been specific and tailored towards these obvious questions. And so my hope is that, you know, OSHA is very good at writing long guidelines. They did it back in January, very, very specific, tons of FAQs that we see on all sorts of state and local websites. So our hope is that we get some guidance from state and local authorities that address these questions on the head and don't leave employers with the risk of guessing whether they're going to be sued for a policy that, like you suggest, vaccinated employees don't have to wear masks and the unvaccinated do. So there's a little bit of a let's sit tight and see over the next couple of weeks approach that we're taking as well.
I just want to jump in and just say we are at time. So anyone that has to hop off, Laura and Cheryl have agreed to stay on for a few more minutes and continue to answer some of the questions that are posted in the Q&A or in the chat. So thank you for those who have attended and who need to leave. We truly appreciate your partnership. If you have follow-up questions, please let us at Associated know, and we're happy to help you kind of navigate through it. So I'm going to turn it back to Cheryl to continue the Q&A, but I wanted to acknowledge those who do have to leave, and we appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, we'll stick around for a few more minutes. We do have a few other questions that were just posted, so we'll kind of keep going with those. The next question is, if work is nearly exclusively outdoors, should that be considered to make it less risky for an employee to not be vaccinated? I am not a scientist. Everything that I've read and everything that I've heard from the CDC and from Fauci has suggested that being outdoors in the midst of a pandemic is less risky than being indoors, simply because there is an abundance of fresh air, right? I mean, they've learned back in the beginning, we were all washing our groceries when we brought them home from the store, and we were quarantining our mail and our Amazon packages and wiping everything down. And in the course of the time over the pandemic, what the experts have really learned is that that's really not the primary way that COVID is transmitted. It's really a respiratory thing through respiratory droplets and so forth. So yes, everything that I've seen has suggested that it's less risky if your job is completely outdoors. So if you're thinking about folks who work in parks or recreation outdoors or construction, that sort of thing, is it okay for those folks not to be vaccinated? That's going to have to be a business decision that I think every company makes. And frankly, to not be vaccinated is more of a risk for the unvaccinated person than it is for the people around them, as I understand it. So that is a factor that you can keep in mind when you're deciding what you want your workplace practices to be.
And I'll just add, all of the state guidance that's published is really user-friendly. They're full of cartoons and cute little infographics. And so our clients have found them really a great resource, and they're divided by industry. And they're also typically divided by, parks and recreation or different types of settings. And so I would look to your state guidelines and your local guidelines. They all have ample websites, and they'll basically tell you, I expect in the next couple of weeks, what they think should and shouldn't happen. And so, you don't want to bear that risk of rolling the dice and guessing. You'll see what they say about your particular industry. And I wouldn't be surprised to see that outdoor work is given a lot of rope on that.
The next question we have, I'm going to ask Laura to answer. Can you offer your employees incentives to get vaccinated? For example, an extra PTO day for those who get vaxxed?
Yeah, so we've gotten this question a few times, and my gut is not a big fan of these types of policies for a couple reasons. One, I don't think at this point that the folks who haven't gotten vaccinated just need a little extra shove to get them over the hump in the form of an extra PTO day. I think at this point, the people who are committed to not getting vaccinated are doing so for some significant personal reasons. And so I just doubt that that will be an effective policy from a practical standpoint. And then from a legal standpoint, again, if you have a workforce with employees who can't get the vaccine because of protected reasons, they may argue that they're not eligible for this perk, or they're not eligible for or a term or condition of their employment is adversely impacted because of their protected characteristics. So to me, it seems like wading into the mud for potentially little benefits.
And that's why I punted that one to Laura, because I know what her answer is, and I agree with it 100%. The next question is, can we ask the following during the interview process? We would ask them to answer yes or no. Have you been vaccinated? Are you willing to get vaccinated? So the answer is you can ask the question, but there are risks associated with that, because if the person says, yes, I've been vaccinated, then you're in the clear. But if the person says, no, I haven't been vaccinated and have no intention of getting vaccinated because I have a medical condition, I'm pregnant, or they identify a sincerely held religious belief, and you decide not to hire that employee for some other legitimate reason, either you don't think they're qualified for the position or you found a better player for the team, what have you, it would be very easy for them to say, I wasn't hired because during the interview process, I disclosed this protected characteristic about myself and they didn't hire me because of that. And so I do think that that is, legally, can you ask the question? For sure, but it does pose a fairly large risk if you don't hire the individual who is asked that question.
And Cheryl, I'll just add, even if you don't prod further to get that extra information, so if it's truly a strict yes, no, have you been vaccinated? Yes, no, are you willing to get vaccinated? And they say no to both of them, and you decide not to hire them, well, the flip side of kind of complaint might happen too, which is they didn't even bother asking me why I'm not getting vaccinated. I'm not getting vaccinated because I'm pregnant, or I'm not getting vaccinated because my religion forbids vaccination. And so they never even bothered to ask that question, and that's why I wasn't hired. So it's really almost in the interview process, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So, again, yes, but with caveats.
Right. And at the end of the day, can you win those lawsuits? I would think so. I would think that as long as you can show a legitimate business reason for not hiring the person, you've got a defense. And if you have employment practices liability insurance through, for example, associated agencies, then you've got coverage for that sort of a claim, which is fantastic. But there is still the initial outlay of cash you might have to spend to satisfy your retention, and then also the time factor involved in litigation. It's just a huge distraction. So again, you can take the risk as long as you're taking an educated risk. We're not going to tell you not to ask the question. We just like you to have the information so that you can make educated decisions about this sort of stuff. Let's see, if the owner does not make mask wearing mandatory anymore, but I have an employee that does not feel comfortable coming into the office, what do I say to him? Well, it kind of goes back to the same issue that we've been outlining for most of our webinar this morning, and that is, what's the reason why he doesn't feel comfortable coming into the office? If the reason he doesn't feel comfortable coming into the office is, for example, either he has a serious medical condition, or he has a family member at home that he has to take care of that has a serious medical condition, and that's the reason why he doesn't feel comfortable, then you probably want to consider whether there's some kind of an accommodation that you can make that would be reasonable and allow that individual to do his job. And if he's been doing his job quite effectively and productively from home for the last 14 months, it might be challenging to successfully claim that allowing him to continue to do so, at least for some period of time, wouldn't be reasonable and would cause your business an undue hardship. I think it's different if the job requires the individual to actually be present on site, because in that instance, if they can't perform their essential job functions from home, then they're not qualified for the job anymore. Laura, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. And I generally, I have a feeling that sort of the generic I'm not comfortable yet employee who doesn't have any protected characteristic, there's only so long that that's going to be able to go on in good faith. And so I think we're still in that sort of raw, vulnerable period where people are really sort of psychologically still in the grips of the pandemic. But over time that's going to fade, and it will be more and more unreasonable for employees to say, I'm really not comfortable coming back yet,
Some employers are doing what they call a soft opening over the summer. Like, they're encouraging employees to come back to the workplace, but they're not mandating it, to try to get people used to the idea. As Laura said, a lot of times it's just, I've been a hermit at home, living in my home office in my basement for 14 months. Coming out into the world seems daunting. So encouraging employees to come back over the summer, maybe get them comfortable with it, baby steps, before mandating that they come back all in one fell swoop. So we've heard some of our clients suggesting they may do that.
So we're getting, obviously we're over time at this point. I think maybe taking one or two more of the questions in the chat. I think that your comments have been tremendous today. They really are both from a legal perspective, but also the practical perspective, which I think that a lot of business leaders and people are, challenged with today. So thank you for your perspective. Why don't take one or two more questions?
So this question is interesting only because Laura and I were just talking about this morning. Have there been any conversations about employers recommending mask wearing during flu season, or if people come to work with cold symptoms that don't warrant them staying home? We were just talking about this. There's been so many people that have been, living in their own protective bubble of their homes for the last year or more. And then when they go out, infrequently everybody's wearing masks. It's entirely possible that there's going to be a resurgence of colds and flu and strep. One of my daughter's college roommates got strep right before we came to pick her up from college. And so I think that people's immunity to those types of illnesses may actually be down because of the hermit-like lifestyle so many of us have been leading. And so, is mask wearing a good idea to prevent people from transmitting colds and flu and strep and that sort of thing? Maybe it's a good idea. I don't think there's anything in the law that would prohibit you from suggesting to your employees or even mandating employees wear masks. I don't know that they'll like it. So there might be a morale issue, but there's nothing that would prohibit you from doing that. We'll take one more question here. If I have my own office and have small kids at home, can I tell my coworkers to wear a mask if they come into my office? Is that okay? Absolutely, 100%. I don't think I need to say anything else. 100%.
That's great. Well, thank you both, Cheryl and Laura, for joining us today for this great, conversation and topic. Obviously, it's continuing to develop, and we'll continue to monitor it. Thank you all who have joined us for the webinar today. We will share the recording of it as well as the PowerPoint presentation to the people that did attend today. So thank you all. We appreciate it and have a great day.
Bye.